Alex Thompson was not your typical young entrepreneur. At just 28, he had built a successful taxi company from the ground up, fueled by his passion for providing reliable transportation and his commitment to treating both drivers and passengers with respect. Growing up in a modest household, Alex understood the value of hard work and perseverance. His parents had instilled in him a strong work ethic, teaching him that success was earned through dedication and integrity. This upbringing shaped his vision for his business, a vision that prioritized fairness and compassion over profit margins. He often wore casual attire, preferring comfort over ostentation. Today, however, he made a choice that would soon lead to unforeseen consequences. He donned a MAGA hat, a decision that would spark controversy and ignite tensions during what he hoped would be an ordinary day. The hat was a gift from a friend who believed in the importance of political expression, but Alex wore it more as a statement about freedom of speech than as an endorsement of any particular ideology. He had always been one to engage in discussions rather than shy away from them, believing that dialogue could bridge divides. On this particular Tuesday morning, the sun shone brightly over the city, casting a golden hue on the bustling streets below. Alex had always loved the energy of the city. Its vibrant life and constant movement inspired him. As he sipped his coffee on the balcony of his apartment, he reflected on how far he had come since launching his taxi service just a few years ago. What started as a small operation with a handful of vehicles had grown into a fleet of over 50 cars, providing jobs for numerous drivers and reliable service to countless passengers. The morning air was crisp, filled with the sounds of honking horns and distant chatter as people hurried to their destinations. Alex took a moment to appreciate the view. The skyline dotted with skyscrapers reaching toward the sky like ambitious dreams. He felt proud of his accomplishments, but also aware of the challenges that lay ahead. The taxi industry was competitive, and maintaining high standards while ensuring profitability was an ongoing struggle. However, today was different. Due to an unexpected scheduling conflict, Alex found himself without access to his luxury car. His trusted sedan was at the dealership for maintenance after a minor accident. Nothing serious, but enough to keep it out of commission for a few days. With back-to-back meetings scheduled throughout the day, he had no choice but to book a ride from his own company. Little did he know that this seemingly mundane decision would spiral into a dramatic confrontation. As he pulled out his phone and opened the app for his taxi service, an application he had personally designed to enhance user experience, he felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. He knew that every ride was an opportunity to connect with people from all walks of life, but he also understood that not every encounter would be pleasant. He quickly input his destination, a popular downtown cafe where he was meeting potential investors, and hit request ride. Moments later, he received a notification that his driver had arrived. He stepped outside his apartment building, adjusting the brim of his hat against the bright sun as he approached the waiting taxi. The vehicle was clean and well-maintained, a testament to the standards he upheld within his company. As Alex settled into the back seat, he took a deep breath and prepared himself for what lay ahead. He reminded himself that every interaction was an opportunity for growth and understanding, an ethos he had cultivated throughout his entrepreneurial journey. Little did he know that today's ride would challenge those beliefs in ways he never anticipated. Certainly, here's an expanded version of Section 2, focusing on the introduction of Mike and the initial dynamics between him and Alex during the ride. As Alex slid into the back seat of the taxi, he was greeted by Mike, a burly man in his late 40s with a scruffy beard and an air of discontent. Mike's eyes flicked to Alex's MAGA hat, and a smirk curled at the corners of his mouth, clearly unimpressed. He had the look of someone who had seen better days. His uniform was wrinkled, and there was a hint of frustration etched on his face. "Nice hat," Mike sneered, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You really think that makes you special?" Alex felt a wave of discomfort wash over him, but chose to remain calm. He had learned early in his career that maintaining composure in the face of hostility was crucial. "Thanks," he replied politely, trying to steer the conversation in a more neutral direction. "How's your day been?" Instead of engaging in small talk, Mike launched into a tirade about politics and society. "You know what I can't stand? People like you," he said bluntly, his voice rising with each word. Sitting pretty while we're out here, busting our asses just to make ends meet. Alex's heart sank as he realized that this ride would not be as smooth as he had hoped. Mike's demeanor was hostile from the start. It seemed like he had already judged Alex based solely on his appearance and choice of headwear. As they drove through the city streets filled with honking cars and bustling pedestrians, Mike continued his rant about how entitled individuals were ruining America. "People like you don't understand what it's like for real workers," Mike continued, his voice thick with resentment. "You sit in your fancy office while we're out here hustling just to make ends meet." The bitterness in his tone cut through the air like a knife. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, Alex wanted to defend himself, but also recognized that engaging in an argument wouldn't help matters. Instead, he took a deep breath and tried to redirect the conversation. "Actually," Alex said carefully, "I started this company to create better opportunities for drivers like you." He hoped that by sharing his vision for the business, Mike might see him as more than just another privileged passenger. But Mike wasn't having it. He dismissed Alex's words with a wave of his hand and continued his tirade about how entitled individuals like him were ruining the country. The more Mike spoke, the more Alex felt trapped in this uncomfortable situation. "Look," Alex said cautiously, trying to maintain some semblance of civility despite Mike's hostility. "I'm not here to debate politics with you. I just need to get to my meeting." But Mike wasn't interested in letting up. Instead, he leaned back in his seat with an air of defiance. "You think you're above it all because you own this little taxi service? You don't know what it's like out here." The atmosphere in the cab grew tense as they hit heavy traffic once again, cars honking all around them while pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks outside. Frustrated by both their surroundings and perhaps feeling emboldened by their earlier conversation, Mike escalated his behavior further. "People like you don't care about anyone else," he continued bitterly. "All you care about is your bottom line." His words dripped with disdain, as if he were accusing Alex not only of ignorance, but also of complicity in a system that exploited people like him. Alex felt himself getting defensive now. This wasn't just an attack on him personally, but also on everything he had worked hard to build over the years. A company founded on principles of respect and fairness for all employees. "Actually," Alex replied firmly yet calmly as they sat at a red light, "I care deeply about my driver's well-being." He paused for emphasis before adding thoughtfully, "That's why I've implemented policies that prioritize fair pay and working conditions." But instead of acknowledging Alex's point or showing any sign of understanding, Mike scoffed derisively at him. "You think that makes any difference? You're still just another rich kid playing at being important." The tension between them thickened as they navigated through traffic. It felt suffocating almost. The city outside buzzed with life. People rushing past on sidewalks, cars honking impatiently. But inside the cab, it was as if time had frozen. Alex couldn't help but wonder how this encounter would unfold. Would he be able to change Mike's perspective, or at least find common ground? Or would their differences drive them further apart? The uncertainty gnawed at him as they continued their journey through the city. As they approached their destination, an upscale restaurant where Alex had an important meeting, Mike suddenly slammed on the brakes in the middle of traffic without warning. "You think you can just sit there and not respect my space?" Mike barked angrily as if all reason had left him entirely. "Clean up after yourself before you get out." Stunned by this unexpected demand from someone who should have been providing him service rather than berating him for no reason whatsoever, Alex looked around at other cars honking behind them in disbelief. "Excuse me?" Alex said incredulously while trying hard not to let his frustration boil over into anger itself. After all, maintaining composure was key here, if only for self-preservation purposes alone. "You're demanding I clean up? I'm your passenger." Mike leaned back in his seat with crossed arms defiantly, while glaring at Alex through the rearview mirror, as though daring him not only to comply, but also somehow submit entirely under pressure too. Certainly, here's the expanded version of the next section, focusing on the escalation of tension and the confrontation between Alex and Mike. As they navigated through heavy traffic on Main Street, Mike's anger seemed to intensify with each passing moment. The streets were alive with the sounds of honking horns and the chatter of pedestrians, but inside the cab, a storm was brewing. Mike's face flushed with frustration as he gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. It was clear that he was not just venting about Alex. He was unleashing a torrent of pent-up resentment that had likely been building for years. "You know what I can't stand?" Mike began again, his voice rising in volume. "People like you who think you can just waltz through life without a care in the world. You wear that hat like it makes you part of something important, but all it does is show how out of touch you really are." Alex felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had anticipated some political banter, but this was turning into an outright assault on his character. "I'm not here to argue politics," he replied, trying to keep his tone even. "I just want to get to my meeting." But Mike wasn't having it. "You think you're above it all because you own this little taxi service? You don't know what it's like out here." His voice dripped with contempt, and Alex could see the disdain in his eyes reflected back at him in the rearview mirror. The tension in the cab thickened like fog rolling in off the ocean, suffocating and oppressive. Alex's mind raced as he considered how to respond. He had always prided himself on being approachable and open-minded. Yet here, he was confronted by a man who seemed unwilling to see beyond his own bitterness. "Look," Alex said cautiously, trying to maintain some semblance of civility despite Mike's hostility. "I started this company to create better opportunities for drivers like you." He hoped that by sharing his vision for the business, Mike might see him as more than just another privileged passenger. But Mike wasn't interested in letting up. Instead, he leaned back in his seat with an air of defiance. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just another rich kid playing at being important." His words were laced with venom, and Alex felt a surge of indignation rise within him. "Actually," Alex replied firmly yet calmly as they sat at a red light, "I care deeply about my driver's well-being." He paused for emphasis before adding thoughtfully, "That's why I've implemented policies that prioritize fair pay and working conditions." Mike scoffed derisively at him. "Policies? What do those mean when you're sitting in your cushy office while we're out here struggling?" He waved his hand dismissively, as if brushing away any notion that Alex could understand the realities of working-class life. The atmosphere in the cab grew increasingly hostile as they sat in traffic, surrounded by cars honking impatiently behind them. Frustrated by both their surroundings and perhaps feeling emboldened by their earlier conversation, Mike escalated his behavior further. "People like you don't care about anyone else," he continued bitterly. "All you care about is your bottom line." His words hung heavy in the air, each one striking Alex like a slap to the face. Alex felt himself getting defensive now. This wasn't just an attack on him personally, but also on everything he had worked hard to build over the years. A company founded on principles of respect and fairness for all employees. He had poured his heart and soul into creating a workplace where drivers felt valued and supported. "Listen," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the rising tide of frustration within him. "I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I genuinely want to make things better for everyone involved." Mike's expression hardened as he shot back. "You think throwing money at problems solves everything? It doesn't. You have no idea what it's like out here." His voice rose higher now, drawing attention from nearby pedestrians who glanced curiously at the taxi. Alex's patience wore thin as he realized that no matter what he said, Mike seemed determined to cling to his anger. The city outside buzzed with life. People rushing past on sidewalks, cars honking impatiently. But inside the cab, it felt as though they were trapped in a bubble of animosity. "Look," Alex said finally, feeling a mix of frustration and empathy for this man who clearly felt wronged by life. "I understand that times are tough for many people right now, but taking it out on me isn't going to change anything." Mike leaned back in his seat again, crossing his arms defiantly while glaring at Alex through the rearview mirror, as though daring him not only to comply, but also somehow submit entirely under pressure too. The tension between them was palpable. It was as if they were two opposing forces locked in an unyielding battle. As they approached their destination, an upscale restaurant where Alex had an important meeting, Mike suddenly slammed on the brakes in the middle of traffic without warning. "You think you could just sit there and not respect my space?" Mike barked angrily as if all reason had left him entirely. "Clean up after yourself before you get out." Stunned by this unexpected demand from someone who should have been providing him service rather than berating him for no reason whatsoever, Alex looked around at other cars honking behind them in disbelief. "Excuse me?" Alex said incredulously while trying hard not to let his frustration boil over into anger itself. After all, maintaining composure was key here, if only for self-preservation purposes alone. "You're demanding I clean up? I'm your passenger." "Certainly." Here's the expanded version of the next section, focusing on a shocking demand and continuing the narrative. As they approached their destination, an upscale restaurant where Alex had an important meeting, Mike suddenly slammed on the brakes in the middle of traffic without warning. The abrupt stop jolted Alex forward in his seat, and he instinctively reached for the seatbelt to steady himself. The cacophony of honking horns erupted around them, a chorus of impatience from drivers caught behind Mike's cab. "You think you can just sit there and not respect my space?" Mike barked angrily, his face flushed with indignation. "Clean up after yourself before you get out." Stunned by this unexpected demand from someone who should have been providing him service rather than berating him for no reason whatsoever, Alex looked around at other cars honking behind them in disbelief. The audacity of Mike's request left him momentarily speechless. "Excuse me?" Alex said incredulously, trying hard not to let his frustration boil over into anger itself. After all, maintaining composure was key here, if only for self-preservation purposes alone. "You're demanding I clean up? I'm your passenger." Mike leaned back in his seat with crossed arms defiantly while glaring at Alex through the rearview mirror, as though daring him not only to comply, but also somehow submit entirely under pressure too. The tension in the cab was palpable, thickening the air around them like a suffocating fog. Alex felt a mix of disbelief and anger surge within him. He had encountered rude passengers before, people who treated drivers poorly or took their frustrations out on those providing a service. But this was different. This was not just rudeness. It was an outright attack on his dignity as a person. "I'm not going to clean anything," he replied firmly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "That's not how this works." Mike's expression hardened further as he leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can just sit there and do nothing? You're just like all the others, entitled and lazy. I'm tired of people like you thinking you can walk all over us." The word stung, and Alex felt a rush of indignation wash over him. He had built this company from scratch, pouring his heart and soul into creating a respectful workplace for drivers like Mike. How could he be so blind to that effort? "I work hard to ensure my drivers are treated well," Alex shot back, his voice rising slightly in frustration. "I'm not your enemy here." Mike scoffed at this, shaking his head dismissively. "You think that makes a difference? You're still just another rich kid playing at being important." His tone dripped with contempt, and Alex could see that no amount of reasoning would penetrate Mike's wall of anger. The traffic around them continued to crawl, and Alex could feel the eyes of other drivers boring into him through the windows of their cars. He glanced out at the bustling street, filled with pedestrians hurrying to work, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside the taxi. It was surreal. Here he was, a successful entrepreneur, being berated by one of his own drivers. "Look," Alex said, trying to regain some control over the situation. "If you're having a bad day, I understand that we all have our struggles. But taking it out on me isn't going to solve anything." He hoped that appealing to Mike's humanity might help diffuse the escalating situation. But Mike wasn't interested in understanding. He was too entrenched in his anger. "You don't get it," he shouted, his voice echoing off the windows of the cab. "You think you could just pay me a few bucks and everything will be fine? You don't know what it's like to struggle." The intensity of Mike's emotions was palpable, and for a moment, Alex felt a flicker of empathy for him, a man clearly overwhelmed by life's challenges. But that empathy quickly faded as he realized that this wasn't about understanding. It was about respect. "Listen," Alex said firmly but calmly, trying to maintain some semblance of authority in this chaotic moment. "I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here because I believe in what my company stands for: fair treatment for everyone involved." He paused for effect before adding, "If you can't respect that, then maybe this job isn't right for you." Mike fell silent for a moment, as if taken aback by Alex's words. The tension hung thick in the air as they sat there in the middle of traffic. Two men from vastly different worlds clashing over principles and pride. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mike muttered under his breath, "Whatever," but it was clear that he hadn't truly absorbed what Alex had said. Instead, he seemed more frustrated than ever. As they sat there waiting for traffic to clear, Alex realized that this confrontation was about more than just one rude driver and one frustrated passenger. It was a reflection of deeper societal issues, class divides, political tensions, and personal struggles that often went unseen. "Look," Alex said finally, softening his tone slightly as he attempted one last appeal to common ground. "I know things are tough right now for many people, but we're all in this together, drivers and passengers alike." He hoped that by framing their interaction as a shared experience rather than an adversarial one, he could bridge the gap between them. But Mike remained unmoved. His anger had become a shield against any attempt at connection or understanding. "Certainly. Here's the expanded version of the next section, focusing on the confrontation and the climax of the encounter between Alex and Mike." As the tension in the cab reached a boiling point, Alex felt a surge of determination. He realized that this was not just a simple disagreement. It was a confrontation that had the potential to redefine how he viewed his role as an entrepreneur and how he interacted with his employees. The stakes were higher than just getting to his meeting on time. This was about standing up for his values and asserting his commitment to respect and dignity in the workplace. "Look, I understand you're angry," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. "But lashing out at me isn't going to change your circumstances. We all have our battles, but that doesn't mean we have to fight each other." Mike's expression hardened, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might explode with rage. "You don't know anything about my life," he shouted, his voice echoing in the confined space of the taxi. "You think you could just throw around some fancy words and make everything better? You're just another privileged jerk who doesn't get it." The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. He had worked tirelessly to build a company that prioritized fairness and respect. Yet here he was being painted as the enemy. "I'm not trying to be privileged," Alex replied, frustration creeping into his tone. "I'm trying to create a better environment for everyone involved, drivers included." Mike scoffed at this, shaking his head as if dismissing Alex's efforts entirely. "You think your little policies make a difference? They don't mean anything when you're sitting in your cushy office while we're out here struggling to make ends meet." His voice was filled with bitterness, and Alex could see that Mike was not just angry at him. He was angry at the world. The cab sat idle in traffic, surrounded by honking horns and impatient drivers glaring at them from their vehicles. The cacophony outside contrasted sharply with the charged atmosphere within the taxi, a microcosm of societal tensions playing out in real time. "Listen," Alex said, feeling a mix of empathy and frustration. "I know things are difficult right now, but I genuinely want to understand what you're going through. If there's something I can do to help improve conditions for drivers like you, I'm all ears." Mike's eyes narrowed as he considered Alex's words. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he might soften, but then his anger flared up again. "You think you can just fix everything with a conversation? That's rich. You have no idea what it's like to work long hours for little pay while people like you sit back and enjoy their lives." Alex felt his heart race as he realized that no matter how hard he tried to connect with Mike, there was a wall between them, one built from years of frustration and resentment that couldn't be easily dismantled. "I'm not trying to minimize your struggles," Alex insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "But if we don't talk about these issues openly, nothing will ever change." In that moment of heated exchange, something shifted within Alex. He understood that this confrontation was not just about him or Mike. It represented a larger dialogue about respect, understanding, and bridging divides between different social classes. He had always believed in fostering conversations that could lead to positive change, but this was proving more challenging than he had anticipated. "Maybe you should try being in my shoes for once," Mike shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Then you'd see how easy it is to sit back and judge others without knowing what they go through every day." Alex felt a pang of frustration at Mike's refusal to see beyond his own anger. "I'm not judging you," he said firmly. "I'm trying to understand where you're coming from." The traffic began moving again, But for Alex, time felt suspended in this moment of confrontation. As they approached their destination, a sleek restaurant where investors awaited him, he knew he had to make a decision: continue this fight or find a way to defuse the situation before it escalated further. "Look," Alex said finally, taking a deep breath as he attempted one last appeal for reason. "I don't want this ride to end on such a negative note. I believe we can find common ground if we both try." He hoped that by extending an olive branch, Mike might reconsider his stance. But Mike remained unmoved. His anger had become a shield against any attempt at connection or understanding. The cab pulled up outside the restaurant just as Alex finished speaking. "Get out," Mike commanded flatly, refusing even to look at him now. Alex felt a wave of disappointment wash over him as he realized that this encounter would not end with any resolution or understanding between them. He opened the door slowly and stepped out onto the bustling sidewalk, leaving behind not only the taxi, but also an unresolved conflict that lingered in the air like smoke from a fire that had yet to be extinguished. As he walked away from the cab toward the entrance of the restaurant, his mind racing with thoughts about what had just transpired, Alex couldn't shake off the feeling that this encounter would haunt him long after it ended. It wasn't just about one rude driver. It was about bridging divides and finding ways to connect with people who felt marginalized and unheard. Certainly, here's the expanded version of the next section, focusing on a moment of reflection, where Alex processes the confrontation and its implications. As Alex stepped out of the taxi and onto the bustling sidewalk, he felt an overwhelming mix of emotions swirling inside him. The upscale restaurant loomed ahead, a stark contrast to the tension he had just experienced in the cab. The chatter of patrons mingling with the clinking of glasses and the aroma of gourmet food wafting through the air felt almost surreal after the heated exchange with Mike. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady himself before entering. Inside, he was greeted by the polished ambience of the restaurant, a world away from the chaos that had just unfolded. Elegant chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over tables adorned with crisp white linens. As he made his way to his reserved table, Alex couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that clung to him like a shadow. Sitting down, he glanced at his watch. He was early, which gave him a moment to collect his thoughts before his investors arrived. But instead of focusing on his upcoming meeting, his mind kept drifting back to Mike, the driver who had unleashed a torrent of anger and frustration that had nothing to do with him personally, but everything to do with a system that often felt rigged against hardworking individuals. What had gone wrong? Alex replayed their conversation in his mind, analyzing each moment. He had tried to reach out to Mike, to show him that he cared about his drivers and wanted to create a better working environment. Yet somehow, every attempt had been met with hostility. It was as if Mike was caught in a cycle of bitterness that prevented him from seeing any possibility for change or understanding. Alex couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Had he been too focused on defending himself instead of genuinely listening to Mike's grievances? He thought about how easy it was for people in positions of power, like himself, to become disconnected from those who worked tirelessly beneath them. In his quest to build a successful business, had he inadvertently overlooked the very people who made that success possible? As he waited for his investors to arrive, Alex pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app. He began jotting down his thoughts about the encounter with Mike, his frustrations, his reflections, and most importantly, what he could learn from this experience. He wrote about how important it was to foster open communication within his company and how he needed to ensure that every driver felt heard and valued. The more he wrote, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about one rude driver. It was about addressing systemic issues within the taxi industry and beyond. It was about creating a culture where employees felt empowered to voice their concerns without fear of retribution or judgment. It was about understanding that everyone carried their own burdens that often went unseen by those who occupied different social strata. Just then, Alex's phone buzzed with a notification. His investors were arriving. He quickly tucked away his notes and prepared himself for the meeting ahead. As they approached, he greeted them with a smile, masking the turmoil still swirling in his mind. "Good morning," one of them said enthusiastically as they took their seats. "Excited to hear your updates on the company." "Thanks for coming," Alex replied, forcing himself to focus on their conversation. He launched into his presentation, discussing growth metrics and future plans for expansion. Yet even as he spoke confidently about numbers and projections, part of him remained preoccupied with thoughts of Mike and what had transpired earlier. Throughout the meeting, Alex found it increasingly difficult to concentrate fully on business matters. His mind kept wandering back to the taxi ride, the anger in Mike's voice, the palpable tension between them, and he couldn't shake off the feeling that this encounter was a wake-up call. As discussions continued around him, Alex began to formulate ideas for how he could implement changes within his company. Perhaps it was time for regular feedback sessions where drivers could voice their concerns directly without fear of backlash. Maybe they could establish an anonymous reporting system where employees could share their experiences and suggestions for improvement. By the end of the meeting, as they wrapped up discussions and prepared to leave, Alex felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that while he couldn't change every individual's perspective overnight, especially not someone like Mike, he could strive to create an environment where everyone felt valued and respected. As he walked out of the restaurant into the bright afternoon sun, Alex felt lighter somehow. The weight of frustration still lingered, but was now accompanied by a sense of determination. He would take this experience as fuel for change, not just within himself, but within his company as well. With newfound clarity in mind, Alex resolved to reach out to all his drivers in the coming days, to listen actively and understand their challenges better than ever before. If there was one lesson he could take away from this encounter with Mike, it was that true leadership involved empathy and understanding, a commitment not only to success, but also to fostering an inclusive workplace where everyone could thrive. Certainly, here's the expanded version of the final section, focusing on the resolution, where Alex takes action based on his reflections and the lessons learned from his encounter with Mike. In the days following his confrontation with Mike, Alex Thompson was determined to turn a moment of conflict into an opportunity for growth, both for himself and for his taxi company. The experience had opened his eyes to the challenges faced by his drivers, and he knew that it was time to take meaningful action. He couldn't allow one negative encounter to define his approach to leadership or diminish his commitment to fostering a positive workplace culture. As he sat in his office, surrounded by the familiar hum of activity from his team, Alex began drafting an email to all drivers. He wanted to create a space for open dialogue where everyone could voice their concerns, share their experiences, and contribute ideas for improvement. He envisioned a series of town hall meetings, informal gatherings where drivers could come together to discuss issues that mattered most to them. Subject: invitation to share your thoughts and ideas, he typed, pausing occasionally to gather his thoughts. Dear team, I hope this message finds you well. As the owner of this company, I want you to know that your voices matter. Recently, I had an encounter that made me realize how important it is for us to communicate openly and honestly about our experiences on the road. He continued writing, emphasizing that he wanted to hear from everyone, whether they had been with the company for years or were new drivers just starting out. I believe that by coming together as a team, we can address any concerns you may have and work collaboratively towards solutions that benefit us all. After sending the email, Alex felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had taken the first step toward creating a more inclusive environment within his company. But he didn't stop there. He also reached out to HR to discuss implementing an anonymous feedback system. This would allow drivers who might feel uncomfortable speaking up in person to share their thoughts without fear of judgment or retribution. Over the next few weeks, Alex organized several town hall meetings at various locations throughout the city. He made it a point to attend each one personally, eager to listen and engage with his drivers. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Many drivers expressed gratitude for the opportunity to share their thoughts and concerns in a supportive environment. At one meeting held in a community center, Alex sat among a diverse group of drivers, some older, some younger, some seasoned veterans of the industry, others fresh faces just starting their careers. As they shared their stories, Alex listened intently, taking notes on everything from pay concerns to suggestions for improving working conditions. One driver spoke up about the challenges of navigating busy streets during rush hour while managing passenger expectations. Another shared experience is about feeling undervalued compared to other service industries. Each story resonated with Alex, reinforcing his belief that understanding these perspectives was crucial for fostering a positive workplace culture. "Thank you all for sharing your experiences," Alex said at the end of one meeting. "It's clear that we have work to do in addressing these issues. I want you all to know that I'm committed to making changes based on what we've discussed today." The room filled with nods of approval and murmurs of appreciation. As these meetings continued, Alex noticed a shift in morale among his drivers. They began to feel more empowered and engaged in their work, no longer just cogs in a machine, but valued members of a team working toward a common goal. The conversation sparked ideas for new initiatives, such as driver training programs focused on customer service and conflict resolution skills. Meanwhile, Mike's situation weighed heavily on Alex's mind. He hadn't seen Mike since their confrontation, but he hoped that by fostering an environment of respect and understanding within the company, he could eventually reach out and offer Mike another chance. A chance not only for redemption, but also for growth. One afternoon, as Alex was reviewing feedback from the recent meetings, he received an unexpected email from Mike. The subject line read, "Apology." With a mix of curiosity and apprehension, Alex opened it. "Dear Alex," it began, "I want to apologize for how I treated you during our ride last week. I was having a rough day and took it out on you instead of dealing with my own issues. I realize now that it wasn't fair." Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him as he read Mike's words. It was clear that Mike had taken time to reflect on their encounter too, a sign that perhaps change was possible after all. "I appreciate your commitment to improving conditions for drivers," Mike continued in the email. "I'd like another chance if you're open to it." With a smile creeping onto his face, Alex quickly typed out a response. "Thank you for reaching out, Mike. I appreciate your honesty and willingness to communicate. Let's meet up soon. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can make our company even better together." As he hit send, Alex felt a renewed sense of hope, not just for himself, but for everyone involved in his taxi service. This experience had taught him invaluable lessons about empathy, communication, and leadership. In the weeks that followed, Alex continued implementing changes based on driver feedback while also working closely with Mike as he returned to driving under new guidelines aimed at fostering respect between drivers and passengers alike. Together, they began developing training sessions focused on customer service and conflict resolution, tools designed not only to improve interactions, but also empower drivers like Mike who had once felt marginalized. Ultimately, what began as a confrontation turned into an opportunity for growth. An opportunity not just for Alex, but also for everyone involved in his company. Through open dialogue and mutual respect, they began building bridges where once there were walls, a testament to the power of understanding in transforming lives and workplaces alike. As Alex looked ahead at the future of his taxi service, a future filled with promise, he felt grateful for that fateful ride which had sparked this journey toward change.